On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. That's an attack we're all familiar with. We studied it in our school books, in our grade schools, high schools, and maybe even in college. It's an attack that brought our country nearly to its knees, especially with the shock that the Japanese would dare attack our military in Pearl Harbor. As if that weren't enough, a few days later, Hitler declares war on the United States and thrusts us into a world war that we never wanted to be a part of. And in fact, it was one of the very reasons why we had the isolationist policy in place. That policy that said what happens on across the oceans from us is really none of our concern. We didn't want to be in everybody else's business. And that didn't work. It was a terrible mistake. And we could talk about that for days, about what could we have done different, but that's neither here nor there. So we'll be attacking the Japanese back, and then they'll be wanting to attack us back. And so the Japanese are going to be thinking of other ways to surprise us. They like surprises, surprise attacks. And so they're going to be thinking about how can they get us again in a unique way that could be as impactful as Pearl Harbor. They would just have to see how it would work out. They knew about the upper level winds of the atmosphere and what we call the jet stream today. And they would get to work trying to figure out how could that be utilized to bring about the next attack. And what they come up with is perhaps one of the strangest uses of weather for an attack ever seen. Again, everyone's familiar with Pearl Harbor. We've all read about it, studied about it, and that is a well-known attack of the Japanese on an American military installation. But the Japanese are going to get to work trying to figure out how to attack us here on the mainland of the U.S., and especially after what happens with the Doolittle raid. Now, with Pearl Harbor occurring in December of 1941, we got to work trying to figure out how to get back at the Japanese. And so we attack Japan on their own soil on April 18th, 1942. So again, Pearl Harbor is December 41. We're already attacking the Japanese in April of 42. It is a raid led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle on Tokyo and other Japanese cities. Now, while these attacks weren't incredibly damaging to Japan, they were impactful when it came to the psychology of the Japanese. They now realize that we fight back, and we're going to fight back, and they're in for a fight. And so this attack will get the Japanese to thinking how they can get us back on our soil once again. And that kind of enters the picture with Mr. Oishi, a Japanese meteorologist who discovered those upper level winds that, like I said, we refer to as the jet stream. He discovered those in about the 1920s. And it begins to be apparent that these winds might be able to carry more than just storm systems across the Pacific. There are no major obstacles out there. It's just all water, right? And so perhaps a balloon would be able to float across those Pacific waters. These balloon bombs are what we refer to as Fugo bombs, and that is short for Fusen Bakudon, which is Japanese for balloon bomb. They're giant hydrogen-filled paper balloons carrying incendiary devices, and they float at around 30,000 feet. And they take about 3 to 5 days to cross the Pacific Ocean. Now, it's a long ways from Japan to the United States. In fact, it's about 5,000 miles. But like I said, there's really no obstacle between here and there. And so perhaps these balloons could float across those waters and to the mainland of the United States. These aren't just any balloon carrying a bomb situation, they're quite complex, quite sophisticated, lots of moving parts and mechanisms and instruments and just anything this thing needs to make it across the Pacific Ocean. And conditions change as the balloons travel. You have the daytime when the sun is out and it's much warmer, and then you have the nighttime where things cool down. So these changing conditions cause changing flying conditions for the balloons. And so that's one reason why it has the different instruments and mechanisms to help it adjust so that it can stay afloat. And even something as simple as if the balloon gets too low, it can drop a sandbag or two and pop back up to a higher altitude. That part's kind of simple, I suppose, but the rest of it, kind of complex. These balloons were made by Japanese schoolgirls, at least the paper part of the balloon, the part that would fly. Factory workers were also used, and at times schools were even converted to bomb making facilities, putting the school kids to work making these paper balloon bombs. Now, the Japanese know that these jet stream winds are strongest in the winter. We know that today as well, in the northern hemisphere at least, because that contrast between the colder air to the north and the warmer air to the south is greatest during this time of the year. And so that's when you see those winds being the strongest. And so the Japanese know this, and so that's why they started this launch of these balloons in November of 1945. And they had hoped that by launching these balloons in the fall, that they would create forest fires in the western United States when they hit the mountainous western portions of the U.S. There was a bit of a drought that fall, as there is just about every fall in the western United States, but a wet winter in the Pacific Northwest really dashed the hopes of the Japanese with their wildfire ideology. They had hoped, too, that those wildfires would fill our skies with smoke and cause great anxiety and nervousness, and perhaps even put us more into a submissive mood to them. But finding these balloon bombs was quite an extraordinary find. Again, they were quite large in size, more than 30 feet wide. But when you found one, they really didn't want you saying much, because we didn't want the Japanese to know that any of these had made it here. Because if they found that out, then they might try to become even more sophisticated with those attacks. So if you found one of these deflated balloons, you might even be approached by someone with the FBI. I found this quote: "Everybody was mighty interested, but when the FBI warned not to discuss it, the whole town clammed up. There are too many people with sons and husbands in the service to take a chance on perhaps giving valuable information to the enemy." We didn't want the Japanese to know that any of these balloons had made it over here to the mainland, so everyone was to stay hush-hush about it. But every once in a while, you know how small town papers can be, every once in a while you'd see a little snippet here and there about a strange balloon device. Here you see a headline: "Balloon found in timber." It might be just enough to make you ask, wonder what that was about. Each red dot you see on this map represents where the remnants of a balloon bomb has been found. The farthest east is Michigan. One near North Door, Michigan, was found by 3 boys and mistaken for a weather balloon. Thankfully, they didn't cause that balloon to detonate. The other was found near Farmington, Michigan, and was found by a gardener. Strange objects falling from the sky. Strange objects floating across the sky. I mean, people would report this stuff, but then they would never really hear much else about it. Some of these balloons are landing in Alaska, of course, Canada, you see there, Oregon, Washington, California, Canada, and like I said, even Michigan. The Japanese never knew how many of these made it here. Look in Montana alone. a very popular landing site for many of these balloons, and basically because of the way the jet stream carries things across the sky. But there is one instance where the balloon bombs did turn tragic. May 5th, 1945, a couple had taken a group of kids from their church on a picnic on Gearhart Mountain in Oregon. It was a beautiful day, and as you can see here, it's a beautiful area, especially for a Sunday afternoon picnic. Now, these balloon bombs were created to where they wouldn't detonate until they were tampered with, dragged, kicked, picked up. That would start the process of, I guess you could say, kind of clicking down the clock to where it would actually explode, and then it could throw shrapnel up to 300 feet. Pastor Archie Mitchell had taken his pregnant wife Elsie on a church picnic on Gearhart Mountain with some children from the church. He had let them out of the car, and he had gone to finish parking the car when he heard the explosion. More than likely, the kids found what was left of this balloon bomb and, out of curiosity, probably started dragging it through the woods to show to everyone else. Elsie Mitchell, 26, pregnant. Joan Patsky, 13. Dick Patsky, 14. Jay Gifford, 13. Edward Engen, 13. And Sherman Shoemaker, 11. All died in that balloon bomb explosion. They are the only civilians killed by enemy action in the continental U.S. during World War II. And there is a monument that stands till this day commemorating where we lost those lives. This is an early example of weather warfare, and what a strange example it is, even showing that the atmosphere could become a battlefield of sorts. You might even still find a balloon bomb today if you stumble into the right place. I wouldn't tamper with it even till this day. The last one was found in 2014. It's important to note that the balloon bomb program was suspended in April of 45, and the Japanese surrender came in September of 45. A paper balloon drifting silently across the Pacific became one of the strangest and deadliest weather-related weapons in military history. Intended to start wildfires, intended to cause disruption and panic and fear and chaos. But thankfully, that just didn't quite work out for the Japanese. In 1976, Sakio Adachi, a Japanese scientist who helped plan the balloon offense, visited the site and laid a wreath at the monument. He later sent a letter of apology to the Patsky family for the loss of their 2 children. In 1995, Japanese students sent 1,000 paper cranes, a Japanese symbol of peace and healing, to the families of the victims. Man, that's a far change from building those paper bombs, right? 6 cherry trees were also delivered to Bly, Oregon to be planted at the site. One of the cherry trees was planted just north of the fenced monument site. The remaining trees were planted inside the fenced area. Later that year, over 500 people attended the 50th anniversary rededication ceremony at the Mitchell Monument site. Japan weaponized the jet stream in a way no one else had ever thought of, essentially turning the wind into a delivery system for war. So the first intercontinental weapon wasn't a missile, it was a balloon just floating across the Pacific Ocean. Weather didn't just influence the war, it became part of the attack. And what a strange attack that turned out to be. This has been Weather and War with meteorologist Mark.